It's time for the Unofficial 40. Soonerscoop.com's very official recruiting podcast featuring Soonerscoop.com recruiting publisher Josh McCuistion. Get your recruiting fix from the leader in Sooner recruiting. It's the Unofficial 40 with your hosts, Soonerscoop.com publishers Carrie Murdoch and Josh McCuistion.
All righty, welcome back. I don't know if we should be like all sullen and depressed on this podcast until OU wins again. I get the feeling that sometimes just we can't say anything and just shut your mouth and let OU play and don't tell me that OU's any good and fire Bob Stoops, fire Mike Stoops. So that's how we start this podcast. As Sooners have had an off week, we welcome in the monster truck driving, baby diaper changing, Mr. Mom, Josh McCuistion, from his home base. How you doing, Josh?
I'm good, and that may be the best intro I've ever had. I'm pretty excited about that.
I'm glad we can please you.
It's like a Khaleesi kind of name.
We've got. I don't get that.
I don't either.
We've got Eddie Radosevich, who is in studio.
Hello.
How is our temperament today, Eddie?
I'm great.
You haven't killed any homeless people today or anything?
No, not today. I've strangled a couple over the weekend.
We discussed this morning on the radio the homeless population over by where you live.
Yeah, it's really crazy. They all sit behind
guy's been panhandling on the corner there of when you get off on Northwest Expressway.
Yeah.
He's been panhandling at 5:30 in the morning the last couple of weeks.
Got to get up before the sun's up. Got to start grinding early.
He's probably trying to get a girlfriend or something.
They have like bum fights and bum parties behind the Schlotzkys on Expressway. Sometimes you should go by there after you leave the station.
Have you ever stopped and watched?
I mean, most of the time, yeah, I'll stop or not stop. I'll just kind of drive by, like when I'm going down the alley back to Schlotzky's or like Chipotle or Panera.
Well, there was some story today about a lady that came home to two people robbing her, but they were having sex on her couch.
I saw that.
And so I was talking about, when I come home from practice every day, I drive down, what is it, James Garner right there? Is that what that
by the railroad
stupid
tracks?
Road is that splits into one way between Gray and Maine?
Yeah.
And, all the homeless people live there, and they're starting to have tarps come up and stuff. I just said how disturbing it was when you see homeless people that are dating. It's like you should have better priorities than, dating people, like getting a job.
It's just all about where your standards are. If you got low enough standards, you can find somebody to date.
That is true.
That's a dating tip from Joe Duvall.
I've seen Eddie go through Tinder before on a drunken night.
Swipe right. Don't even look at
Is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all we did in Philadelphia and New York City over the weekend.
You got on Tinder in Philadelphia and New York.
Hell yeah.
I am not with the world. I need to catch up.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're probably best talking about this stuff to avoid the subject of OU football right now, which
it's kind of like dating an ugly girl right now.
Yeah. Okay, first off, before we get to OU football, let's hit the top news of the day that came out. I think you had this last night, Josh. I don't know if you sat on it till this morning or put it out late last night. But Jalen Reagor, I know how to say his name now that he's on the precipice of not being an OU commitment, going to take an official visit to TCU this weekend. I saw a tweet from him talking about it was kind of one of those, not woe is me, but recruiting is bittersweet. I don't know if you saw that today, Josh, or not.
No, Jalen, I've talked to him a little today, and I think he's definitely one of those guys that's probably a little surprised by some of the feedback he's gotten. I think he expected everyone to just say, oh, well, he's taking a visit, and that's okay, because he's always been very open about I'm committed to Oklahoma. And, when I talked to him after the Ohio State weekend, he was the guy that, I'm 100% committed to Oklahoma. I think the thing where the disconnect is between fans and really coaches as well and the kids is a kid will say I'm 100% committed to Oklahoma and still feel like it's okay to take visits. Coaches and fans don't see it that way, and that's where you get into these things where people get hurt and people get upset about, well, you're going to take that visit. We thought you were with us, that kind of thing. I don't think Jalen Reagor sees this as a big deal. I don't think he sees this as an offense. He's going with his Waxahachie teammate who was committed to TCU. He's going to see OU play. I think he feels like if there was ever a safe weekend to take that trip, this is probably it. But at the same time, from OU's perspective and, that of the fans, you understand because already things feel like, we're talking about the boat's kind of rocking. And for one of the key commitments and a guy that a lot of people feel like could come in and help early to be taking this trip to a Big 12 rival, that's going to put a lot of people on alert.
To me, this is where it begins, guys. I mean, look, if OU goes and wins this weekend in front of Jalen Reagor, I think, okay, everything could be fine. But if they have another loss, oh my God, you might not see me on the board next week.
If they go out, if they lose this weekend, I would bet that he decommits within 48 hours.
It's like, to continue the dating talk, and it's something we've talked about on here before, that recruiting is a lot like dating with the girl. It's like having a girlfriend-boyfriend kind of relationship. And you're not going to feel that good if you're in a committed relationship with someone and they're like, oh, no, I'm going to go over to this person's house, this guy's house. But trust me, nothing's going to happen. Don't worry. You just have to trust me, nothing's going to happen.
What kind of official visits do they have at TCU?
I bet they are great ones.
The ones that Jamarcus McFarland had at Texas.
The ones that Casey Paha and crew.
So they end up with makeout sessions with Gary Patterson?
Maybe. TCU, though, let's just say trips to Fort Worth are fun. It's
a cow town, though.
No, it's a private school that has a lot of money and a lot of beautiful women.
They do have a lot of hot chicks there.
They have the best. They have the best Palm Squad in the Big 12.
Oh, they're fantastic. Like when you're just sitting in the press box, they have a very nice stadium.
Yeah.
When you're sitting in the press box and you look down, and you see a ton of hot women.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hot women that go to TCU.
TCU is loaded.
Got the daddies with the money.
Yeah,
that
a lot of
married
that.
A hot woman that produced a hot child.
A lot of that. I thought it was funny a couple years ago when we were down there. I think they came over the PA system before the game, or it might have been during the game, and it was like there's a white Chevy Tahoe with and they gave the license plate number that needed to move, and it was like every kid was looking at their phone like, is that my car out there, my Range Rover?
And unlike Baylor,
I'm so not a raper.
Yeah,
they have a good reputation.
Very much so.
Look, Josh, I don't know. I mean, we didn't really get your take. I guess we did so much, but let me ask you: OU loses. Is it trouble for Jalen Reagor?
Oh, I think it is. I think these next 2 weeks, it's so funny because when we talked before Houston, we were talking about, OU goes and wins Houston and they go and win against Ohio State. And all of a sudden the doors to Jeffrey Okudah and Marvin Wilson, all these doors open. Well, now it's down to 2 games again, but the stakes are a little different. Oklahoma needs to win this week against TCU and then obviously next week in Dallas to handle the situation with a lot of these in-state recruits because Texas is involved with several guys. TCU would be happy to take almost any member of OU's class. So those guys are all still in play. And like I said, that's what's different about recruiting now than 10 years ago. I mean, guys that I think in their heads are truly committed, they're willing to look around. I mean, they're going to give other schools an opportunity. And when they do, things can happen. So, yeah, I mean, if OU loses against TCU and looks bad and, just really kind of continues the theme of their games against quality opponents so far, I think they're in very real trouble with Jalen Reagor.
To marry some analogies, if OU loses this one, is it going to be kind of like if you're dating a guy and he lost his job? Now all of a sudden OU's out there trying to date homeless women pretty soon?
Baylor's not my problem.
I think you get into
my problem.
I mean, you guys remember me talking about this a few weeks ago when I was saying, the nice thing for OU is I've got so many guys committed and they don't have to spend as much time with, trying to kind of finish the class. They've only got about 12 guys they're still looking at. When you start losing commitments, well, then you have to start making new offers and building new relationships. And all that momentum you kind of had started with 2018, well, you've got to gear that back and start focusing again on 2017, not only to keep your commitments, but to fill any guys that you lose. So to me, that's why these next 2 weeks. Now, Oklahoma, I would argue should win these next two games. I don't think TCU's special. Texas is terrible defensively. I mean, you go down the list. These are games Oklahoma can and should win. And if they can handle that, I think everything looks a lot different in 2 weeks. But if they even split these, I have trouble believing Oklahoma's current class stays completely informed.
It changed the dynamic of that game.
And the thing that you worry about is if one falls, then sharks are in the water all of a sudden. And I know, Josh, we've talked about it before, Robert Barnes is a guy they're not giving up on, and he's had some flirtations there with just visiting. And then you get guys coming in, and if other coaches see, oh, well, Jalen Reagor is waffling now, especially if they lose this weekend, you're going to get people from all over the country trying to attack this class all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah. You mix all the talent that's already in. I mean, there's a reason it's a top 5 class in the country. There's a lot of guys who can play a lot of good football for Oklahoma or anyone else. But I think Robert Barnes is a perfect example, Kerry. If Robert Barnes is willing to say, I might take a visit somewhere, I might go look around, that's a guy whose dad played football at OU at a very high level and is a guy that's been very much a recruiter for OU from beginning to end. If he's willing to say that, it's the same stuff we talked about months ago with Tate Martell. Like, how can you tell guys OU's the best place for you if you're still, in the eyes of really anyone objective, looking around?
Yeah, well, the one thing, though, that's positive, I guess, for Oklahoma is something like with Marvin Wilson, a point you made last week, Josh, is that, well, the other two teams in that recruitment, Texas and Florida State, they didn't exactly blow anybody out of the water. In fact, they both lost with poor defensive performances, too, which might have even been worse than Oklahoma's. So in the Big 12 this year, there's no one really stepping up to take the mantle away from Oklahoma yet. So there's still an opportunity there for Oklahoma to kind of calm things down, take their mantle atop the Big 12 and calm down their class. No one's really filled that vacuum atop Baylor's down. TCU had the loss to Arkansas. They struggled. I mean, they only beat Iowa State by 21. Iowa State's not a good football team this year. So there's not exactly like there's a ton of great play in the Big 12 to fill the void that Oklahoma's left here.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you just look at, that's why everybody got into that panic. We talked about this last week with Marvin Wilson. Like, who on his list, if he's a guy that's interested in staying close to home, who on his list excites you right now? LSU? No. Texas? No. I mean, you run down that list, there's only so many options available to him. And especially if you throw in that he's not that involved with Houston and Tom Herman is probably LSU's top target, there is just so much volatility right now that a lot of things can play out. And think of what Oklahoma can pitch. They can say to a recruit, hey, look what we did. We went 10-2 or 9-3, and look at the classes we had before you guys. We get a top 5 class. That's how we start beating Clemson. That's how we start playing with Ohio State. That to me is almost as good a pitch as they could have, because they get to tell these guys, you're the people that are going to take us over the top. And that's what every kid wants to hear and wants to believe. And OU has some evidence to say this is true.
There's a little, excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. There's a little bit of a caveat with all of this. And that is, well, other than OU not doing well, I mean, they're 1-2 right now. Say they go 1-3. Say a lot of pressure is out there on Bob Stoops to do this and that, which there's not going to be any pressure from the administrative level. I mean, I think that's the one thing that
it's sad. People
need to realize is that, Joe Castiglione, David Boren, if Bob Stoops starts out 1-3, this isn't LSU. They will give him an opportunity. Even if this year completely falls apart, I don't think that there's any chance. You might have a demand of some staff changes if the defense doesn't improve. But if there is public pressure and you do have all this stuff going on, my worst fear would probably be that Stoops' agent starts floating his name, for LSU.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Kerry. My biggest fear if I were an Oklahoma fan and I wanted Bob Stoops to stick around wouldn't be that Joe Castiglione or David Boren would fire him, because I think I said this to you Monday, Kerry. As long as those guys are there, I don't see there's any way Bob Stoops get fired. The way he leaves, I think, is if he gets disillusioned with Norman. He feels like he's done what he can here, that he feels like things aren't going in the right direction, and maybe he sees an opportunity and starts floating his name around places. And I don't. It might have more of a possibility if his kids were seniors this year instead of juniors, but it's something that with LSU opening, who knows?
But, his agent isn't above.
He's thrown his name out there before.
I mean, going into the Sugar Bowl, his agent was throwing his name out there for the Browns job. So there have been these little periods of time. The Notre Dame thing happened several years back. But there's history there to say that, Neil Cornrich is his agent, likes to throw his name around there when he feels like he's underappreciated a little bit in Norman.
They start 1-4, there should be pressure.
I agree.
And I think it's kind of sad, actually, from the administration standpoint, that there won't be any pressure.
Well, let's okay. Well, that gives us a chance to talk about Boren coming out with stuff, and let's face it, David Boren doesn't make decisions quickly because. And I said that I was talking about this morning. It's a lot like the stadium issue. You have David Boren making decisions, telling people things behind the scenes, whether it's regents, upper administration in the athletic department, where they talk about things. And things were not going well on the stadium renovation at one time. And things were being said, not by David Boren, but by everyone around him. Just like this Big 12, OU is not interested in an expansion thing that Pete Thamel wrote. Was it yesterday for Sports Illustrated? And then David Boren immediately comes out. This is kind of his MO. He comes out with a statement saying, well, they didn't get that from me. As if to buy some time almost, because it creates a big storm and he has to deal with that. But it's the same thing, I would think, with looking at Bob Stoops and his future. He will come out immediately and say, Bob Stoops is secure. There's nothing that we're going to do. Then he might get some blowback, and that could change. I mean, and that's kind of how it works at all athletic departments across the country, especially people that have been together for as long as they are.
I'm still not convinced, though, that David Boren really, truly cares about college football.
No.
There's a lot of grandstanding from his side of things, but
he cares about running a university. He cares about generating money, building a legacy, building
honors dorms.
Yes, that's what he cares about. That's his playing field. Football is not his playing field.
That's why going 10-2 and not winning national championships, not adding to the staff for Bob and the company I don't think he really understands that's what you have to do if you want to play with the big boys. And I think that
I would say that is more Joe as far as the facilities, him balancing the budget, and that's just the way it operates. It's just like with the minor sports, losing John Roddick, losing the wrestling coach. I don't want to put Sonny Galloway in that category, but he wanted more money.
Yeah.
The only people that he has given more money than they actually bring into in minor sports, you want to include women's basketball in minor sports?
That's not a sport, so.
Well, Patty Gasso, because he felt pressure and she had to exert a little bit of pressure, I would think. Because she wins national championships, she should be the highest, one of the highest paid softball coaches in the country.
Especially when there's someone stealing money from the university less than a mile south of the softball complex.
Just name names.
Sherry Cole.
Yeah, I mean
stealing money.
But you can't say any women's basketball coach should be paid $1 million.
No,
They all lose money.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you guys are hitting the point on the head with the money
that's
thing.
the thing about Joe C. He wants to balance the budget.
Yeah, they care about money.
That's his Super Bowl is not not being an athletic department. That's his calling card. Not be an athletic department that spends more money than it brings in.
They both care about money in different ways. Joe C. wants to balance the budget. I mean, he cares about prestige and success and all that, but he wants to balance the budget. David Boren thinks of athletics as a way to bring in revenue. There's a lot of money and stuff that can come in if the football team is good. Enrollment went up like 30% after they won the national title in 2000. So having the football team be good, having the athletics be good, I think that's David Boren cares more about what that brings with it. He's not so much concerned about micromanaging and wanting them to be perfect all the time. He kind of says, as long as the money's coming in, as long as the fans are showing up, I'm okay with that.
And I think he would be like Alabama is probably not going to happen under David Boren's watch. Like I don't think David Boren wants Oklahoma to be known as a football factory. He wants Oklahoma to be known as having a very good football team that plays by the rules. And if you look at Stoops' contract, That's basically all he asks of him is, here's your money. This is what you make. You have to make some appearances. You cannot break NCAA rules. Like, it is so, his contract is so basic for someone that makes $5-6 million a year. And it basically comes down to, don't embarrass us. We don't want to be, we don't want to have the reputation that we had when Switzer resigned.
How much of that comes down to him winning a national title in his second year and feeling like the job security is just there? I mean, they can't really they probably haven't felt like they could force him on anything because of that national title. Doesn't it feel like his immunity or whatever comes from that? If he hadn't won that in 2000, wouldn't he be on the table for pressure for firing at multiple points during his career?
From my gathering, the closest that Bob ever came to being on the hot seat was that game before they went to K-State on the road back in the 2014 season. Because they were facing the real possibility of finishing that season 8-4. Like, they had K-State on the road, who was a good team that year, and then they had to go to Stillwater. And it ended up, they won that K-State game because Trevor Knight had his best game since Alabama. Or this was This was before Alabama. One of the best games he'd had of his entire life up to that point. And then they went to OSU, and Blake Bell threw that touchdown pass to Jalen Saunders in the end zone to make him 10-2 and going to the Sugar Bowl, which no one thought that they would win. But I'm telling you, before that Kansas State game, they would have been going into that at what, 8-2?
Yeah.
And facing the possibility, they weren't playing real well. They faced the possibility of going 8-4 to end that season. And I'm telling you, people were freaking out about, because you got to remember the climate then. It was since 2008. Remember, 2009 was terrible. 11, they were number one to start the season. That was the year they beat Florida State on the road. It was like massive. Like, they had so much juice. And then they just fell apart that season. They lost that game to Tech that year, that rain-delayed game.
Dark ages.
But was it 2011, did they still win they didn't win the Big 12 that year. Then 2012.
OSU.
2012, they split with Kansas State,
2012 was losing to Notre Dame at home.
Right, and they lost to Kansas State, and they split with Kansas State.
Right, they lost to Kansas State, that really bizarre game where Honeycutt missed field goals.
Yeah, Blake Bell fumbled.
So there was, going into 2014, there was all disappointment. That was like 6 straight years of just being disappointed and people getting sick of the program. And then Alabama happened. And he really hasn't been under any pressure since then.
Which I think.
And you remember, the thing, and I'm sorry, I'm just going on.
You're good.
The thing to remember about 2014 is, like, Stoops broke all the rules in that offseason. Remember, they had that thing at the middle of the field where they celebrated with the Sugar Bowl trophy? And Trevor Knight was out there, all right, this season starts now, no more Sugar Bowl. And
that's right. That was at the spring game.
Yeah, at the spring game. And then they went 8-5, and it fell apart because Bob Stoops never let teams get full of themselves based on what they did the previous year. He did that year because he needed to, because everybody was so desperate for something good to happen in the program, and he knew it, and he played it up, and he let the players play it up, and that's a big reason why they went 8-5 the next year.
Yeah. I was going to say the repunt and then the Russell Athletic Bowl back-to-back. I mean, those things, I think if he didn't have a national title and he just had the repunt at home against Oklahoma State and lost that game in overtime, and then they go to Clemson and lose 40-6, I don't know. Maybe the circumstances are different there, because that was a low moment people forget right before they bounce back and go to the college football playoff the next year.
Then how do they, I guess, going from here, how do they dig themselves out of this hole? Because even if they go and win the Big 12, it's not going to mean shit to the fans.
Cusser.
There should be a lot more cussing the way this program's playing right now.
Look, if they win out this year, then and how they play, do they play well? And they win out this year and they start looking like a more dominant team, and defensively they figure things out, people are going to be happy. And
I don't think they will.
No, they will. You look back on it, and it really depends on how Houston does. If they somehow beat Louisville, and I have a pretty good feeling Ohio State's going to be in the college football playoff. Michigan State's not what they were.
Yeah.
Unless Wisconsin beats them. Michigan, I still don't think they're there yet. But maybe I'm wrong. I haven't seen them enough yet. But I'm just saying, you're going to have 2 losses to 2 teams that are 2 of the best teams in the country, and then you beat everybody else. There's not going to be people you're not going to have a leg to stand on if you're going to demand changes or Bob Stoops to be let go.
I'll say this. I think it comes down to the recruiting class. If they can play well enough to keep that recruiting class intact.
And I think they will. If they go undefeated, they'll keep the recruiting class intact.
If they do that, I think people can then get excited, not necessarily just for the Big 12 championship, but what it represents moving forward. Because I think it feels like right now that there's this gap with Oklahoma. Like they missed on a few recruiting classes, and the talent that they need.
Well, there is a gap,
and it's still the talent that they need is there, but it's still too young, or it's coming in, and the guys that they have that are experienced just aren't quite the level of athlete that they need to compete with somebody like Ohio State. So if they can get that recruiting class in, builds on the freshmen that have played well this year, I think that the fans could be okay with that. At least find some sort of excitement moving forward with that.
They shouldn't be. That'd be like them winning. They're just going to win a terrible conference is what it comes down to. There are 9 decent teams in this league.
No, it's a bad year.
So I don't think it's going to save anything if they go 10-2. And I don't think they're going to go 10-2. I don't know if they're going to win this weekend.
Yeah, we're talking
pretty rosy future. Let's face it. The next 2 weeks are huge.
Right?
Yeah.
We'll know a lot more after this weekend. We'll know even more 2 weeks from now.
And with how this team kind of feeds off of stuff. So if they feel positive momentum, I feel like they could go on a run. But if they lose this week, they could fall into some quicksand. I mean, they really could. It feels like they are almost on the. They have this personality of, and I think I wrote about this in something where if something goes good, everything's going great. They really roll. They play well. But once stuff starts to go bad, they don't handle it well. And especially that's kind of strange when you consider how well they played last year when adversity faced them and think of games like Tennessee. But this year. Hasn't been the case. And so I fear if they lose that TCU game, it's just going to snowball.
That has been a trademark of, I think, this program for a while, is they can't handle adversity, though.
I don't know if it's that. I mean, Josh, just in terms of what you watch from Oklahoma and what you see in the program now, I mean, you saw these kids in high school. In your opinion, is it more that OU is not recruiting as much talent as other places? Or are they not developing talent?
Well, everybody always likes to have an A or a B. And if you made me choose one, I would say it's probably a little bit more on the recruiting side. I think Oklahoma let themselves just go relaxed in that situation. Now, I do think we've talked about it before, and I don't want it to make it sound like this is still going on. I think Oklahoma has very much accepted the recruiting climate that they live in now and has made changes accordingly. But at the same time, you look, I mean, we talk about this every year around in January and February when Oklahoma would have 3 or 4 guys they were still eyeing, maybe a guy, and half of those guys they'd offered in the last few weeks. Well, it's fine if 1 or 2 guys, an Oklahoma position coach just loves that guy. They really buy into what he's got and think given a few years he'll add some weight or he'll get a little bigger or whatever it is they're projecting him as. That's fine. My problem is when 30% of your class are guys that were, University of Ohio and North Texas, and when you're competing against those schools, at some point, not every other major program was wrong. That's not going to happen that frequently. So,
and you're saying that's been happening too much.
Exactly. I mean, you look at it. I mean, as much as Jordan Evans is going to end up a 3-year starter, and Jordan Evans' probably second best offer was Iowa State. And I think Jordan Evans is a good player. I thought Oklahoma should have offered him. So I don't want to come off as revisionist history.
And let's face it, if Oklahoma offers him early like they should have, then he does have better offers.
Absolutely. And that's true. But why didn't Oklahoma offer him earlier?
Yeah.
Then you get that. That's kind of a chicken or the egg situation because
they
had
it's a chink in your evaluation too to know that you got a guy that's a 3-year starter. I mean, it's just like Ryan Broyles. I mean, they did the same with him. They waited so long. Well, and he ends up being one of the best receivers college football's ever seen.
And to Josh's point about Evans too, he was a guy who was developing. He was playing cornerback, I think, when he first came into Norman North. So he was somebody who was growing, and he was kind of a project. And
he was a really skinny kid.
He's
we went and saw him a lot. Yeah. I mean, he was a skinny defensive end linebacker that looked like he didn't like contact when he was in high school.
He still might not. Let's be honest.
But and to be fair, on the other side of things, look at Charles Walker. He had no great offers. I mean, I think his best was like ULM. clearly OU got that right. Now he's got some health issues, and those were there in high school, and they've kind of followed him around. But at the same time, I mean, I get when you take a few gambles on guys that you're like, oh, you know, that kid just couldn't catch a break, or he was in a scheme that didn't fit him very well, you know, whatever the case may be. But you can't build entire classes around that. And that's something – it's something I remember hearing somebody talk about. And Kerry, it may have been Krabby now that I think about it. He was talking about the last few years of the R.C. Slocum era at A&M, where Slocum was doing that same thing, where he was getting these kids – like Jackson Appel and some of those guys who ended up being perfectly fine college football players. But when you're at a place like Oklahoma, you need NFL guys. You need as many as you can if you're going to compete on the level you want to compete at. And look around that team right now. How many guys do you see in that group that are legitimate first and second round picks in that starting lineup? I mean,
and the problem is the ones that you think might be like Orlando Brown, he might have issues. I mean, other than just, you know, his physical ability. I mean, he might have attitude issues.
Yep.
And he's probably gonna have to play right tackle too in the NFL, so that's gonna be something that's.
And he doesn't have like an NFL type body. He's still. I mean, I'm one
raw.
To talk, but I mean,
raw would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, he's still frumpy in a lot of areas. I mean, he's not defined anywhere.
He doesn't look matured yet physically.
No, he doesn't
feel like he's hit his peak there.
I think that's just the biggest complaint from what I've heard from fans and everything is that, you know, even if they can win the Big 12 conference, there's still that gap, and there's still.
But that's just the standard hatred for the Big 12, which I get, and I totally understand it. But it's kind of like, you know, OU loses to Ohio State, fire Tim Kish. I mean,
yeah,
there's a
that's not going to help.
It's become the standard reaction to anything that goes wrong.
Just like, get rid of somebody and get somebody new.
But look, I'm not sticking up for the Big 12. But what I am saying, I think it's better if they don't expand to two crappy teams. I mean, Cincinnati does nothing for me. Houston, I don't think you need that in your back pocket.
Yeah.
I mean, it hurts too many teams, and it's not just for Oklahoma. They should be looking at it as, and Texas should be too, which neither one of these have shown much foresight throughout this whole thing. If you're taking Houston, you're weakening Texas Tech, you're weakening Oklahoma State, you're weakening TCU. And you're just throwing it all down in Houston. I don't understand why you would do that if you really value your conference members.
The conference expansion thing has been handled so poorly by anybody that has opened their mouth about it that it's really actually embarrassing to even.
There's no confidence in anybody, Bowlesby, Boren, anyone.
No, and that's why, you know, it's funny that earlier you were talking about how one of the things in Bob Stoops' contract is just don't embarrass the university, when every time David Boren has opened his mouth about conference expansion, he's embarrassed the university.
I wouldn't say he's embarrassed the university. What's embarrassing is when he says one thing and then changes his mind. I mean, it goes all the way back to we're not going to be a wallflower on this.
It's really bad, though, when you just scroll through Twitter and anything that comes out about the Big 12, David Boren's the automatic punching bag.
Yeah.
I mean, he looks like a clown nationally.
Well, trust me, and the people at like Missouri, he's a big reason why Missouri's not in the conference anymore. I mean, we can blame Texas all we want, but Boren screwed that up as much as anybody.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that.
When he kind of overtook, you know, he kind of became the spokesman for the league at that point. Missouri was still in it, and there was some deal about, you know, they were trying to have a conference call, and he burst in on it and pissed off all their curators or whatever they call them there. But I mean, yeah, I think Missouri looks at Boren as the evil. You know, like Nebraska looks at Texas as the evil ones. I think Missouri looks at Oklahoma as the evil ones.
It's interesting. I've always wondered about that dynamic because I have seen Missouri folks always when they have an opportunity to throw shade at David Boren.
Yeah,
they take it.
They don't like him.
I did not know that.
I think.
Go ahead, Joe.
No, Josh, go ahead.
Well, at what point, and I was talking to somebody about this on a show that I was doing last week, and he was asking about Boren's comments because it was right after he had said, you know, hey, maybe we're not going to do any expansion. That's not a set thing, or whatever his exact quote was. At what point do people just stop listening? At what point is he a caricature and loses all that cachet that he at one point had? I mean, when do people just shut him off? Because like you said, Kerry, he keeps saying these strong, bold things early, And then when it comes time, to sink or swim,
To execute,
he just kind of steps back from the table.
I think he likes it that way. I think he likes keeping it in discussion, making it look like they're always thinking about it, looking forward to it, but he doesn't ever have to make a final decision. He doesn't have to come out and say, "Oh, I'm against expansion completely," and have to back that up. He can say, "Okay, we're kind of looking at it," and then he can just punt it down the road and not have to worry about it. I think that's kind of what he's taken in this scenario. He's not wanting to put himself too far out there. He just wants to make it look like he is.
Yeah, and he's not well connected to issues a lot of the time. I mean, I remember when all the stadium stuff was going on, I had somebody tell me, a really good source, that they actually were in a meeting and David Boren told people in the athletic department that college football wouldn't even exist in 20 years.
Yeah.
And that they needed to find a way to think about how they're going to turn Owen Field into a soccer stadium.
Oh my God! We got to stop the podcast because I think people just ran off the road hearing that.
But
There are accidents all over Oklahoma.
That's an example of just kind of strange. I mean,
They're a panic
like the
bunch.
position that he's in, and I'm trying to tell you guys, like, and people listening, like, he doesn't really get it like a Joe Castillo, or even like the general fan, like a hardcore OU fan, knew a lot more about OU's options and what was realistic when he made the statements about being psychologically disadvantaged. But to his credit, yeah, they get these consultants that come in and say, this is the lay of the land. This is what you've got. This is what people think. And they start paying attention to journalists and what they're saying and the public. And then they kind of get immersed in it. And now they're immersed in it. They've looked at it all. And I'm actually encouraged that you come out. And David Boren hasn't officially come out with anything. But for OU to step back and say, well, we're probably okay at 10. I'm actually more encouraged by that than having them taking Houston and Cincinnati or BYU and Connecticut or something.
I think that's just I agree with you in what you're saying, but I think that's just why it's so frustrating for Oklahoma fans is that you have to go through that whole charade for them to get to this point where they're like, oh, now we get it. And it's like, the people have been saying that for the last 10 years. What did you not understand when they said that a long time ago?
I think here's what it goes back to is like they just like losing Louisville. That's the same thing. They weren't connected enough to know
or realize
what they were missing out on or losing on. And that's not just OU. OU wanted them actually, but it's these other people that have presidents that are just interested in what their next fundraiser is going to be. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like. It's in the media. People get older. If they don't work to stay connected, to be on Twitter, to know what's going on around them, all of a sudden they're just old and out of touch.
Yeah.
And I mean, when it comes to athletics, presidents are out of touch just by default, unless they're young and vibrant and really care about that stuff. But a 75-year-old president like David Boren, you really think he had any clue that the candidates were as crappy as they were when he made that statement?
So you're telling me he was the last to know when Courtney Garnett committed via Snapchat?
It was, I thought it was Arthur McGinnis.
Arthur McGinnis.
Damn it. We got to edit that and let me redo that. 3, 2, 1. So he was the last one to know when Arthur McGinnis.
I am not editing jack squat.
Yes. Thank you.
Now,
I'm just
Terry,
glad it's not me today.
You said something about feeling better about Oklahoma, or not Oklahoma, but kind of the Big 12 and Boren saying, hey, we may stick at 10. Is that you saying you feel like that's a move toward OU leaving the conference?
Exactly.
Or do you think that's better for, okay.
No,
I think there's no way 10, a model of 10 just doesn't work.
I'm going to install a 9-year countdown clock in this studio until 2025, like the date OU can leave.
I will come pray to it every morning.
Conference.
Every morning at sunrise, I'll come pray to it.
So that's the thing. I'm on your side. Like, don't be like, oh, he's just being a mouthpiece. He says it's fine if they stay in the Big 12. No, but everything has its time. It's just like, firing Tim Kish has its time. It's not when you're starting 1-2 after coming off of a college football playoff, or Bob Stoops or Mike Stoops, for God's sakes, for that. When they're 1-4, we'll talk and we'll panic and we'll freak out. But my God, you got to pace yourself.
It is fun to see like the immediate turn on Mike Stoops after they lead the league in, I think it was like 4 of 6 categories, defensive categories last year. And granted, it still wasn't a great conference, but they were playing some pretty good defense towards the end of the season. And all of a sudden, through 3 games, it's like they wish he was never alive.
I think it's like flashbacks. I think it's that people are remembering.
No, it is.
Julian Wilson versus Baylor. Then they march down the field. People are afraid. Oh no, that's going to happen again. I think people are seeing that coming.
I've always compared it to a bad marriage. It's like a couple gets in a fight because somebody brought home their order wrong from the drive-thru, and then all of a sudden you're screaming at your wife because she slept with your brother back in college, and then all of a sudden you're just screaming at each other. It escalates so quickly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I there is one way that they can right all this, and
of course,
and
if you're a homeless person, that's worth yelling at them about if they mess up your order at McDonald's. If you're a homeless couple,
homeless couples don't get to order.
They just
at McDonald's.
shank each other.
They just take whatever's out of the garbage.
So the husband goes garbage diving for her. That's like his.
Well, it just depends, I think.
I'm just glad I don't have a brother now. Jeez.
I mean,
that story sounded very specific.
Whoever.
No, my brother's not that suave.
It just depends. I mean, whoever's earning the money, I think that person gets to sit and not have to dig through the trash.
Well, neither one of them are earning money. They're homeless.
Well, I think that
really
there's ways that people earn money that are homeless.
Is this an analogy for Mike Stoops somehow, or are we just talking about homeless people?
I just got tired of talking about fans being upset. It's my own PTSD.
We're going back to hobo fights?
Okay, TCU is coming up. There is a game. And I thought we would try and not make this an hour and 30-minute podcast this time around because I don't think people want to listen to that much. But back to everyone being upset, and like you said, Joe, I mean, I think a really good point. There's a lot of lashing out going on. And a lot of people on the board, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, it all turns around to, I could be like, hey, here, Eric Wren this was a bad example because it didn't really happen, but I assume that if I went on and talked a whole lot about Eric Wren getting awarded a scholarship, it would turn into something kind of ugly like, it just shows how far this program's falls and we got to give walk-on scholarships. We can't get scholarship players on our own, and fire Tim Kish too. So like everything you say gets crapped on. And so I thought, okay, you can't really ask Bob Stoops if he's doing a bad job or if things in the program are broke. So I kind of came up with the term culture this week. Asked Mark Andrews about it, and then I asked Bob Stoops, and he was pretty defiant that there wasn't a culture problem with his program.
Truthfully, yes.
Actually, he was a lot more detailed than that. And it helps if I pull up the right thing. Eddie, I might have to edit this podcast after all. Here's Bob Stoops talking about the culture.
I'm talking with Mark earlier before you came up. He was talking about when he first got here, kind of learning the culture of your program, what it means to be at Oklahoma.
Mark Andrews.
Mark Andrews. What? No, I say something else.
I was trying to think of.
I'm curious, how much you come in, you change a culture, but how much do you have to reestablish that year to year?
I don't think it's as much as you think. The cultures here, the guys, the way they work in the out of season. Sometimes you get some tough breaks. You don't execute and play as well as you thought you would. That doesn't mean the culture's broke. I know, that was the theme 2 years ago. Then we go to the playoffs and win the Big 12 championship, and it isn't again. It never was. My point is the culture's been the same here for a long time. That doesn't mean you win the same every year, and that doesn't mean you execute the same every year. So no, I don't think it's much different. It's just, we haven't played as well.
And here's the thing. It's like the response to that, Josh, was like, oh, here he goes again talking about Big 12 championships. He just went to the college football playoff. Like, that's not a valid criticism. I mean, and basically a lot of what Stoops said this week was, and he doesn't say that forcefully because he doesn't want to make it seem like he's making excuses, but they've played 2 really good damn teams, and they lost to them, and they're not happy about that. But it is the way it is, that he wants them to play better, and he's trying to get them to play better.
I think a lot of people have latched on to the introvert idea that this team's full of a bunch of guys that aren't exactly loud, boisterous leaders.
But they are.
But, that's just kind of who they are. And to me, it's like Bob Stoops can say that, you just didn't play well. But from a fan's perspective, you get paid $6 million to make sure they play well. Ultimately the responsibility should fall upon the coach, and then therefore the players can't be blamed. The culture kind of becomes not a scapegoat; it becomes the reason because of you can't be too hard on the players. The coach is the ones that bring these guys in. They're the GM and the coach, so therefore the blame should come on them. Whether it's culture, whether it's this or that, it feels like he's. It's not.
Here's the thing. It's not. There's not one answer for this. Right. It's not just the coaches. It's not just the players. Like they lost to Houston because of coaching to me, because of that corner spot. But they also lost because Baker Mayfield, who should know better, played like absolute garbage.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the two biggest reasons.
All that.
Those are the two biggest reasons they lost to Houston. And what Baker did, I don't think you can put on Lincoln Riley. That's on Baker.
Yeah.
He's better than that.
He is better than that. But he hasn't been better than that all year. I mean, through 3 games, he has played very, very poorly, I would say. And I don't know where you get the confidence reinstilled in him, and I just don't know. I'm very down on this team, if you can't tell.
And this is where you get this issue, guys. Like, sure, yeah, you can't put that on Lincoln, and you can't put that on Bob, and Baker played poorly, but who brought the talent there? Yeah, Baker Mayfield, you didn't bring him, but he's their best option. What does that say? Like, yeah. Well, and that's not to say that Baker Mayfield wasn't great last year.
Well, I think you could argue that Joe is the best overall player on offense, Mixon.
And he barely gets the ball.
No. I mean in the sense of he is their best option at quarterback. A former walk-on at Texas Tech.
Yeah, but he's the best option at a lot of places, though, Josh.
Well, he might be, but if that's what – still, though, no matter how you want to spin that, he is your best option. He's playing terribly.
Yeah, and he played behind an offensive line that they're going against. It's Oklahoma versus Houston game 1. Common sense should tell you that Oklahoma's going to have the athletes on the offensive line to dominate Houston.
I'm telling you, Houston's surprisingly good.
But Houston's got athletes. They had Ed Oliver, who was a 5-star last year, and the highest-ranked recruit Oklahoma has on the offensive line right now is Alex Dalton. So
I was shocked how big Houston was. Yeah. Like, just watching them in warm-ups, I'm like, that doesn't look like a non-Power 5 team.
Well, it seems like every week.
They were bigger, I think, up front than Ohio State was on their offensive line.
Ohio State's a different big than Houston. Does that make sense? They were Houston.
It's in their pants.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it seemed like the Ohio State guys. It's just
swinging
like
past your knees.
It just seems like the Ohio State guys are like that's a badass MFer right there. And then the Houston guy was like Ed Oliver. I mean, he's a big kid, but he's not just crazy big.
Yeah. I like the Houston game. Yes, if you want to say coaching, I think you can say that's coaching. Ohio State, to me, is clearly just a team that has better athletes 1 through 22.
They replaced 16 starters, and all those 16 looked better than Oklahoma was putting out there, and those are new guys.
And the other thing is, and I said this, it's unforgivable that you don't have a cornerback. It's unforgivable that you don't have a cornerback ready to go. And I think it's if you have a criticism of Bob in this program is there's too much loyalty when there shouldn't be, whether it's in coaches or players. I mean, go back to Paul Thompson, 2005. I mean, Trevor Knight might have been the starting quarterback over Blake Bell because that's the one time Bob said, we're not going with the loyalty route.
Yeah.
But they went with Dakota Austin, knowing full well that he has one hand tied behind his back as a legitimate cornerback, and it didn't work out.
I think that's where they could help themselves with. And I know they don't want to just go out to please the fans, but
by the way, Mike Stoops kind of threw Stan Von Taylor under the bus a little bit yesterday. I don't know if you were standing there.
I listened back, and that was the part that I'm going to use in a video feature that we do on the DBs. But it was more of a. I mean, he's been here his freshman year, and I haven't seen him since.
He started against Tulsa when he was a freshman, and he Mike Stoops was like, because he was asked straight out, I think by Garrett Emig, of the Tulsa World, because. Really, I mean, I remember when DJ Wolf was a corner and he got yanked. I think it was the Missouri game, and never played again. but they at least had guys to put in there. This is the first year I can ever remember, Josh, where OU legitimately doesn't have 2 cornerbacks.
I can't really remember a year at a position where they were this lost. Like, I mean, maybe it was a guy you didn't think was that great, but like not just they flat out don't have an answer at that position. And I thought you brought up something last week, and it's kind of stuck with me. I've been thinking about it. In the Big 12, they need 3.
Yeah.
So they need not only for that position to figure itself out, but they need another corner to come along and start playing good football. But that brings in the question, well, then Will Johnson makes sense. Then Will Johnson can do some things that make sense. And to me, when you talked about, the Houston game, that's the part to me that's unforgivable about Houston. The Ohio State game was absolutely zero reaction to what Ohio State was doing up front. Yeah, they're bigger. I get it. They do. They have better personnel. I wouldn't argue that from a pure talent standpoint. But to make no changes to address what Ohio State was doing to them,
to not try Doucette or Caleb Kelly. I mean,
exactly. Like, why not try when it clearly wasn't working with Will Johnson?
It's just something that normal people don't understand.
Well, no. I mean, let's give Mike Stoops credit. He came out and said that was my fault. I should have had a better plan. And yes, then you have to say, why didn't you have a better plan? I mean, it becomes the chicken and the egg coaching versus fan argument that nobody's going to win, which is, it's what we do. So we should be used to it. I never get used to it, though. It's like, okay, you screwed up. I'm pissed off at you. And then the coach admits, yes, I screwed up. I should have been better. And the fan says, why weren't you better? I mean, it can go on and on and on.
Well, they
forever.
want something drastic to happen.
Yeah.
They want blood.
They want a firing because of that.
And I understand the fans, why they're upset for Mike because of the way the defense is played on the field. But just from a guy that talks about his defense, I don't know why they get so upset with what he says. I know he can sound.
He's the only honest guy on that staff that will actually tell you the answers to the questions that you're asking. Just like the Stan Von Taylor stuff. He went through the guys. He's like, we recruited highly recruited guys. Everybody else wanted them, and they haven't either panned out. And he mentioned L.J. Moore. He mentioned Stan Von Taylor.
MJ and
he didn't mention Antoine Stevens, but he didn't mention PJ, probably because he's on the team. I brought up Gary Simon to him.
Yeah. Why haven't they developed anybody at cornerback, though? I mean, what? How far behind is Stan Von Taylor? He can go out there and get burnt and not turn his head.
Jordan Parker showed up last week in pads, and they're already saying they're giving him a look. What does that say about Antoine Stevens and PJ and Bonasaur and those guys? I mean, they're already Jordan Parker's a true freshman showing up, and they're saying, okay, we'll give this guy a look.
We've been practicing for more than a week.
I know, but he was out for a little bit, and he came back in pads, and now they're saying, okay, we're going to give this guy a look, and while these guys have been there for years.
One thing that was interesting this week, and I was trying to see if I had it, but, we talked to Obo Okoronkwo yesterday. I think now that the name PJ and Bonasaur's come up, he talked about the team meetings that they've had, the player-only meetings. I think this is one of those things. I mean, Josh, you've seen this stuff over the years. You hear that, and the fans get all excited because the only time you ever talk about... Here's why people get excited. People always bring up player-only meetings after big wins. So, like, the only time anybody ever hears about player-only meetings is when someone goes into a press conference and explains, oh, well, that's why we turned this thing around. We had players-only meetings. But, so, I'm not really... Oh, you had players-only meetings, but they're not... They did it... They unveiled it before they fixed everything. So, I don't think you can say, oh, boy... I mean, how many players-only meetings have happened and people have just continued to suck? We don't know. Because no one ever, after a loss, says... Boy, I really thought those player-only meetings were going to do more.
I guess we'll have to have one again this week.
I guess, to me, the only way players-only meeting works is if the players have decided to somehow mutiny. Like they've said, okay, well, the coaches are doing it wrong. We got to do it ourselves. Or what can the players? What insight do they have? Oh, we got together now for an hour. Now we fixed it all.
Well, and what I took out of it was the player-only meetings were basically a bunch of bitching.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of use this example a lot of, Bill over there stole my girlfriend. He knew I liked her, so I'm really upset about it. It's been affecting my performance on the field.
It was. Are we getting ready to play the oboe stuff? Because I just think
we're not. Because I'm an idiot.
I just thought it was really interesting, just the stuff that they talked about, and that I think that there was some chemistry issues, or there are some chemistry issues.
No, and that's why you were talking about PJ in Banasaur. I think he's a disgruntled guy. I mean, and he's probably, if anybody's disgruntled, it probably should be PJ in Banasaur, because he started a game last year. He was number 2 on the depth chart, and now Mike Stoops says, he's not in our plans.
Starting against Tulsa is the kiss of death now.
It really is.
Stan Von
That
Taylor
game will
now,
ruin
and
you.
Banasaur.
Don't get beat by lesser teams.
But
I see your
think,
point, though.
I think you had a lot of guys in the locker room. Maybe Stan Von was one. I don't know, any guys that weren't playing. And they basically went to him and said, if we're going to be good, you guys that aren't playing, you have to be on board. You can't just be dragging us down, being malcontents in the locker room. We're not doing well. We need everyone's support. We need to be a team. And it doesn't sound like that they have been.
I asked Jordan Thomas a little bit about that, and he said while he feels for his friends, guys that have been there with him for a few years, and he wishes they could be playing and making a name for himself, he basically said they know the score. When you come to OU, they put the best 11 on the field. And if it's not you, it's because the coaches didn't think you were one of the best. And so I guess part of that meeting is those older guys just saying that. Saying you knew the score when you came here. If you're not in the field, that's the way it is.
So,
but I don't know. We're projecting a lot here too, though. We weren't there. No one really opened up exactly what was going on in these player-only meetings.
We're allowed to when you're 1-2.
What else are we going to do? Nobody wants to hear us talk about how well things are going or how they're going to turn things around.
There is nothing going well right now.
I guess to Eddie's point, we just said that we talked about if they won the rest of their games, would Eddie be happy? And he's already said no.
Here's the thing, Josh. How many times have we been in this situation after a loss and the world was coming to an end?
They've always answered.
I mean, I would say that's all you remember of OU football, isn't it, Josh?
You mean that's all that people remember is the last thing that happened?
No.
If it's bad?
Just after a loss, the world, and that's why I said I hate bye weeks after losses. It gives people 2 weeks, and they never get over it and never get any better. But it after a loss, people always declare it's the end of the world. Everybody's lost it. Bob Stoops has lost it. This team has massive problems. I have a friend who's on campus. And they said Adrian Peterson brings his Taco Bell and sits, which was true, brings his Taco Bell into class and sits in the back and eats it and doesn't pay attention. Like this team is in disarray, and they always come out, and Bob Stoops gets his team to. He's never lost a regular season game twice in a row.
Well, we've talked about this for years, guys. Bob Stoops is clearly the best. Nobody wants to quote Chris Berman these days, but you almost feel like nobody circles the wagons like Oklahoma. Like when it's going bad, that's when they're at their best. That they always seem to answer that bell. Look back, Kerry, you brought that Kansas State game when Trevor Knight bounced back a few years ago. There was that whole situation with it was last year with the after the Texas
airport,
game and the horrible flight and all that stuff that went wrong, and they ate the Taco Bell and all the KFC. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. And then they went out and played one of their best games of the season. Like they looked really crisp and nearly perfect. Bob and Oklahoma as a program, it's not great as a front runner. It's just not. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know why it always seems to happen. But you can't ignore that it continues to happen. But at the same time, you can't ignore that when people kind of write OU off and stop expecting anything of them, they seem to find their feet. Now, I don't know. Again, I don't want to claim that I know the answer to that, but you can't ignore the history of it. And it's why I think if you made me pick the Big 12 champion right now, I'd pick Oklahoma. I would. I still think they're the best team. And Eddie's right. It's a bad conference, but that doesn't change that that's the schedule OU's facing. That's who they're looking at. There's nobody on that schedule they shouldn't be.
I mean, you could argue these next 2 games are going to be their toughest stretch in the whole conference. I mean, right here, TCU and Texas. If they get through those 2 games, then they're set up pretty well to run through the Big 12.
Baylor at home.
Baylor at home, OSU at home.
I don't think they beat Tech and Lubbock, but
their defense is horrible, man. You are way down. You're drunk. You're drunk on negativity.
Hey, now remember, you said something similar to Joe when after Houston. Joe was the one that said, "What if they go 1-4?" And now they're staring it down.
But like I said, I'm going to tell you, and we got to wrap this up, but I'm going to tell you this. I think OU definitely wins Saturday. And I think they're impressive in how they do it. Because talking to players this week, there is a purpose there that I haven't seen all season. I think Bob Stoops has a purpose, just coaching-wise. Like, I got uncomfortable with Lovable Bob. Like, he hasn't been Lovable Bob. He's getting in their asses. I mean, Mike Stoops is always getting in their asses, but now you've got Kerry Cooks pushing them. You've got, I'm sure Cale Gundy's really good at being a penis out at practice to people, especially this week.
Yeah.
But, you know, you got Lincoln Riley. His purpose has seemed different when we talked to him the last 2 weeks. I think that they're going to have this team ready to play Saturday.
I just don't understand why it takes getting this low before something like that happens.
Everybody needs a little motivation.
Yeah.
If we find a hot chick that wants to do some video, you might have some motivation too someday.
Some motivation just thinking about that.
That's not motivation.
We're not saying that, we're not finding you a date.
Oh. Oh. Well, never mind then.
I've seen Eddie. I'm not going to say there's anyone in the media now not targeting anyone, but I've seen like ditzy girls come through here that do video stuff. Eddie has no patience for them, no matter how hot they are.
Well, I mean, some are just dumbasses, but I think everyone around is good.
I'm sure when you were in school, there were tons of them. They were just clueless.
I mean, yeah, there were a couple. One still works in the market.
Oh, God.
Okay. So, any predictions this weekend? Is anybody predicting a loss? Eddie, we should go to you first.
I think they're going to win this weekend, but I just don't know what that means.
Whether it's impressive or...
I just don't know what that means. I think that they're going to play well, and I think that, as you said, they've always answered when they've been pushed into this type of corner. But at the same time, I could see Kenny Hill throwing for 550 yards, and they just have no answer on the left side of the defense.
Yeah.
I think 55 brought it up in the post-practice thread on Tuesday night, and you asked Mike about it yesterday, in that they have to get some kind of pressure on the quarterback. Yeah. Their defensive line play has been
atrocious.
Awful.
Yeah. It's been Obo Okoronkwo, and
it's going to be really interesting. Also,
Ahmad Thomas has one of their 5 sacks on the season.
Yeah, and
Neville Galmore's been their best defensive lineman at getting pressure, and he's hardly out there.
Yeah,
that seems like it's 3-on-5 half the time. Like, I don't understand how people think a pressure is going to just suddenly arise.
And when you're playing Will Johnson at the other edge,
exactly, you can double 2/3 of their offensive or the defensive line. That's not that difficult to block.
Well, Charles Walker being banged up is part of it because he's a guy that can do it from the end position. I mean, Matt Diamond's never really going to be that guy. He's going to have to eat blockers. But, I mean, Charles Walker has been banged up, not doing it like he should. And, I mean, Gallimore's shown flashes. And I think if he's able to get into the game more, I think he's more of a guy that's going to make plays than Jordan Wade or Matt Romar.
By the way, quickly, before we get out of here, let me play this real quick. And we've already broken the hour limit, so we're screwed. Injuries. Here was Bob Stoops Monday.
I know you mentioned a lot. You're pretty banged up right now. Did the off week help with that at all?
Definitely. We'll still be possibly without a couple of guys, and once I know that for sure, I'll let that out here this week. But the majority of them, will be back, practicing some today.
And yesterday, Mike Stoops did confirm what I think are those 2 guys that he's talking about. Matt Diamond has not been practicing. Matt Romar is practicing. And then
Tay Evans.
Tay Evans has not been practicing, which
kind of
some
big.
people might prefer to have Emmanuel Beal in there.
Emmanuel Beal looked good against Ohio State. I think he was one of the guys that actually played well in that front when he had his chances.
Tay Evans has just been so banged up all year. Like, he can't stay on the field.
Yeah. But, at some point, I think the question has to be asked, are you hurt or are you injured?
Yeah.
And Tay Evans I think that's more of a head injury, isn't it?
Concussion, I think.
Than anything else, but I don't know. At some point, I think that a lot of these guys have to be asked, how hard are you?
Eddie would just give Tay Evans a pamphlet for ALS and said, get back out there.
I I'd do very drastic things if I was a head coach. Like after a 1-2 start, I probably would have kicked a couple players off the team just to set an example. Like
Which
and
two?
do it. And,
Which two on this team?
I don't know.
Eddie would kick Seibert off the team just to say make a statement.
Oh yeah, and I'd do it in front of the team too.
Then you'd have walk-on tryouts the very next day.
Yeah, I'd put a couple highlights together of him missing stuff or missing field goals, and then I'd turn the lights back on. I'd bring him up to the front and say, "We're done with you."
No, you'd make the field goal first. Eddie would drill a 27-yarder, turn to Seibert, spit his dip out, and say, "You're out of here."
Spit my dip on him. Sorry, Austin.
All right. That's Eddie Radosevich, ladies and gentlemen. The star of the Unofficial 40 podcast.
Just trying to keep it real.
Josh,
doing it for Harambe.
Appreciate you sitting around basically listening to us just rant. It had to be frustrating podcast for you today. We didn't let you talk. Did he hang up?
He probably left.
No, I'm absolutely still here.
I was like, did he just leave?
We were no, but you guys don't understand. Like when you'll get like that, and especially I now have the kiddo home. I have to put the mic on silent, and I swear about 2 or 3 different times during this podcast, I've started to say something. And I'm like, damn, they're just talking right over me. And then I look down and my mic's still off, and I'm like, damn it, and realize the whole thing is kaput. So.
I hear Miss Laney right now.
She's asking me what I'm doing.
Hi,
that's
Laney.
one of our favorite questions.
She's probably the most liked out of anybody on this podcast by the fans.
We just need.
She should be.
If they lose this game, it's just going to be all pictures of Laney next week on Soonerscoop.com.
Throwing darts at Bob Stoops.
No, just happy photos of a little child running.
Yeah, I'm
through
not
a
sure,
meadow.
Eddie. I'm ready to take her down the road of throwing darts at people. She's she's not ready for a people to kill list and that kind of thing.
She's not your daughter, Eddie. You can't raise her evil.
I feel like an uncle though, and I should have some say. Now, if OU loses next week, we got to do. We'll do 63rd and Northwest Expressway bum interviews.
Scoop HD bum fights.
I think it might be the perfect show for the 98-pound wrestler.
Do you think you could
I'm
coach-
not letting go of that.
Do you just go ask people? Do you think that you could coach better than Tim Kish?
Yeah, we'd have to maybe ask. I told you about my idea doing curbside interviews in Norman, asking about play calls.
We should do a Sooner Scoop outreach for homeless people where we give them subscriptions that they have no way to use.
I'm down to walk around town
just
with
walking around and presenting them with subscriptions.
Here's a gift card for a free year of Soonerscoop.com, sir.
Now you figure out your internet.
No, what you could do, give them Sooner Scoop shirts. I mean, all those people that drive by them when they're out there bumming for change, like they're just perfect billboards.
I gotta think people have thought of that though. I bet that's like a bum, like that's a code of honor thing. Like you can't wear advertising if you're gonna be panhandling.
We would have to give the one to the Mr. Miyagi. You guys know the one I'm talking about.
Is the Norman?
Yeah.
The Korean Jesus?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that guy.
All right, before this thing spirals out of control, we're going to end it. It's the Unofficial 40. Hey, I want to say appreciate everybody out there who's been going and giving us reviews on iTunes. We've had all 5-star reviews. I don't know if that's disappointing. You almost want someone to give you a 0 and just put a horrible, don't do that.
You know that's going to happen now.
No, I just the power of suggestion. Don't do that. I don't want to see. Let's not make a joke out of making the podcast a 0. Unless it's a really funny review. But no, if you guys get a chance, whether you're listening on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, drop us a review if you don't mind. We'd love to have one, get your thoughts on the show, what you think. But yeah, it's been one of our biggest months ever. We continue to grow on the podcast, so we really appreciate that. Keep checking out Soonerscoop.com. If you're not a subscriber, I tell you what, we'll be coming up. If the season goes off the rails, we'll be coming up with really good specials for you. If you're listening and you're not a subscriber, so we can get you on Sooner Scoop, and you can see what we're always talking about with the crazies on the message board that we do love. I'm not going to name any names I don't love. That would just be counterproductive.
You want me to?
I'm trying to think who's number one on your list.
Of just
I
people.
wonder who's number one on Josh's list.
Of people I just don't like in general.
Okay, that's a total different subject for a podcast another time.
I'll start just tweeting names.
That would be the drunken podcast that everybody wants us to do, I think. We just start naming names of people that we don't like. that bug us. Okay, I'm not letting this go any further. Thanks to Josh McQuistion, who now has to go be Mr. Mom. He's probably going to get in his monster truck and drive her to a Mexican food place. Thanks to Eddie Radosevich. Thanks to Joe Duvall here in studio. I'm Kerry Murdoch, and we'll see you next time here on the Unofficial 40.